Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of South Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. In 1831, plantation owner Frederick Middleton posted an unprecedented $5,000 reward for the capture of Moses, an enslaved man who became known as the Monster of Goose Creek. Court documents reveal he allegedly killed 7 white overseers across 3 counties and orchestrated what would have been the largest slave revolt since Denmark Vesey's conspiracy. For nearly 3 years, Moses evaded the most extensive manhunt in Southern history. In 2019, archaeologists excavating the former Middleton plantation unearthed a leather-bound journal beneath the slave quarters that would transform our understanding of the man behind the monstrous legend and the brutal system that created him. The team from Charleston Historical Society, led by Dr. Eleanor Wright, discovered the remarkably preserved document during the final phase of a 3-year excavation project intended to document the living conditions of the enslaved population at what was once one of South Carolina's most prosperous rice plantations. The journal, wrapped in protective oilcloth, had been carefully concealed beneath a loose floorboard in the corner of what appeared to be the largest of the slave dwellings. Carbon dating analysis performed at the University of North Carolina confirmed the paper dated precisely to the period between 1826 and 1834, aligning perfectly with the documented presence of Moses on the plantation. What made the discovery particularly remarkable, as noted in Dr. Wright's preliminary report published in the Southern Historical Review, was not merely its excellent state of preservation, but the unexpected literacy and eloquence of its author, a man who, according to all official records of the period, should never have been able to write at all. The journal's first entry, dated the 17th of April, 1826, begins with words that sent shockwaves through the academic community. Today I was sold to Master Frederick Middleton, who believes he has purchased a body. He does not yet understand he has acquired a mind that refuses to be enslaved. The Middleton plantation records, meticulously preserved in the South Carolina Historical Archives, document the purchase of Moses on the 15th of April, 1826, from the Harrington Estate in Fairfax County, Virginia, where the collapse of tobacco prices had forced the liquidation of assets, including 47 enslaved persons sold at auction. The bill of sale, discovered in 1972 during the cataloging of the Middleton family papers, indicates that Frederick Middleton paid the considerable sum of $800 for Moses, nearly twice the price commanded by other enslaved men of similar age and physical condition, with a notation specifying exceptional skill in carpentry and furniture making as justification for the premium. A separate manifest listing the transported enslaved individuals describes Moses as male, approximately 25 years of age, 6 feet tall, no visible markings, exceptionally intelligent but docile and obedient in temperament, a description that would later seem darkly ironic in light of subsequent events. According to oral histories recorded in the Federal Writers Project interviews of the 1,930 seconds, Moses arrived at the Middleton plantation on a rainy April morning, one of 17 newly purchased enslaved persons transported by wagon from Virginia, and was immediately separated from the group for assignment to the plantation workshop rather than the fields. Sarah Williams, a house slave approximately 20 years of age, who had been born on the Middleton plantation and served primarily as lady's maid to Mrs. Middleton, later recounted to her granddaughter, whose testimony was recorded in 1891, that she had been present when Moses was first presented to the master for inspection, noting that while the other new arrivals kept their eyes downcast, Moses had briefly looked directly at Frederick Middleton before lowering his gaze, a momentary breach of etiquette that the master had either not noticed or chosen to overlook. A receipt dated the 20th of April, 1826, indicates the purchase of new tools for the carpentry workshop, suggesting Middleton's eagerness to capitalize on his new acquisition skills. while the plantation's production ledger notes a significant increase in the manufacture of furniture and decorative items in the months following Moses's arrival, confirming his considerable talents. Fragments of an inventory from the Harrington estate, discovered in the Virginia State Library in 1985, suggest that Moses had been born on that plantation around 1801 to an enslaved woman named Ruth, who served as a cook in the main house, though no record exists of his paternity, and that he had been apprenticed to the plantation carpenter at age 12, demonstrating an aptitude that would ultimately determine his market value and initial placement within the Middleton plantation hierarchy. The leather-bound journal, discovered beneath the slave quarters, provides extraordinary insight into Moses's clandestine education, with entries dated from late 1826 revealing that Elizabeth Middleton, the 20-year-old daughter of Frederick Middleton, had secretly undertaken to teach Moses to read and write during evening hours when the household had retired. According to correspondence between Mrs. Augusta Middleton and her sister in Charleston, preserved in the Middleton family archives, Elizabeth had returned from 3 years at the Hartford Female Seminary in Connecticut in early 1826, just months before Moses's arrival, bringing with her what her mother described as troubling northern notions regarding the peculiar institution that I fear may prove difficult to dislodge. The journal entries, growing more articulate and sophisticated over time, detail how Elizabeth would leave a lantern in the library window as a signal that it was safe for Moses to enter through the rarely used side door after completing his evening duties in the workshop. Their lessons conducted in whispers among the leather-bound volumes that lined the walls. Miss Elizabeth says knowledge is the only possession that cannot be stolen or sold. Reads an entry from November 1826, the handwriting still uncertain but legible, while a December entry notes, "Tonight we read from Mr. Equiano's narrative, which Miss Elizabeth smuggled from her school trunk. She says it reveals truths about our condition that her father would burn if discovered. The considerable risk undertaken by both teacher and student cannot be overstated." South Carolina had passed increasingly stringent anti-literacy laws for enslaved individuals, with the 1740 Negro Act explicitly prohibiting teaching slaves to write, while an 1834 amendment would extend the prohibition to reading as well, with penalties for white instructors including substantial fines and potential imprisonment. The journal describes Elizabeth's growing horror at plantation conditions she had not been exposed to during her northern education, recording her statement that to witness suffering and remain silent is to become complicit in the infliction of that suffering. A rare surviving letter from Elizabeth to her former teacher in Hartford, intercepted by her father, but preserved among his papers, obliquely references her private charitable work and expresses gratitude for having been shown that moral courage often requires defiance of unjust laws and customs. Even at great personal risk, the plantation account books indirectly corroborate these clandestine meetings, noting Elizabeth's unusual requests for additional candles and lamp oil for her evening reading, expenses that increased notably during the winter months of 1826 to 1827. As Moses's literacy developed through 1827, his journal entries evolved from simple records of daily events into a devastating chronicle of plantation atrocities, with meticulous documentation of the punishment system administered by Jeremiah Holt, the overseer hired by Frederick Middleton in February of that year, after his predecessor was dismissed for what plantation records euphemistically termed insufficient discipline of the labor force. The journal describes in tenor, unflinching detail how Holt instituted a regimented hierarchy of punishments for increasingly minor infractions: 30 lashes for attempted escape, 20 for insubordination, 15 for failing to meet work quotas, and 10 for sullenness or signs of discontent, all administered with a specially commissioned whip Holt referred to as the Persuader, featuring multiple leather tails tipped with metal fragments that routinely left permanent scars. Court records unearthed from the Charleston County Courthouse archives reveal that Holt had previously been brought to trial 3 times between 1820 and 1825 for the deaths of enslaved people on plantations where he had served as overseer, yet was acquitted in each case when the presiding judges accepted the defense that the deaths resulted from necessary correction rather than excessive cruelty. The Beaufort County Gazette from March 1825 reported that Holt's acquittal in the 3rd case was celebrated with a dinner in his honor, hosted by several prominent plantation owners, who praised his unflinching dedication to maintaining proper discipline among the Negro population. Moses's journal entry from the 12th of April, 1827, records with clinical precision how a field hand named Isaiah received 40 lashes for allegedly stealing food, resulting in blood loss so severe that he remained unconscious for 2 days. While a September entry documents the public whipping of a pregnant woman for working too slowly, causing her to miscarry the following night. Perhaps most disturbing is Moses's account of the correction box, a coffin-like wooden container barely large enough for a human body, in which Holt would confine individuals for days with minimal water and no food, often in the unrelenting summer heat or winter cold. Noting that 2 have died in the box since Master Middleton acquired it at Mr. Holt's recommendation, though both deaths were attributed to natural causes in the plantation records. The journal entries from this period show increasingly less steady handwriting and contain occasional water stains that researchers at the Stortzes to accessed. Charleston Historical Society have suggested may be teardrops, particularly on pages recounting punishments inflicted upon children or the elderly. The pivotal moment in Moses's transformation from skilled craftsman to the figure who would later be called the Monster of Goose Creek occurred on the 17th of June, 1828. According to testimony provided by Sarah Williams to abolitionist interviewer Harriet Beecher in 1857, nearly 3 decades after the events and published posthumously in the anthology Voices from Bondage, Boston, 1864. The incident, corroborated by Moses's own journal and plantation records noting the death of elderly field hand Jacob from natural causes following correction, involved the public flogging of 73-year-old Jacob for the offense of failing to remove his hat quickly enough upon Holt's approach. Sarah, whose duties that day had brought her to the yard with refreshments for Mrs. Middleton's garden party, became an unwilling witness as Holt ordered Jacob stripped and tied to the whipping post within view of both the assembled house slaves and the white guests, announcing his intention to make an example of disrespect. According to Sarah's testimony, the flogging continued long after Jacob lost consciousness, with Holt pausing periodically to revive the elderly man with buckets of salt water before resuming the punishment, ultimately delivering over 60 lashes before Jacob's heart failed. What haunts me still, Sarah recounted to Beecher, was not merely the cruelty of the act, but the indifference of the white ladies and gentlemen who continued their pleasant conversation on the veranda, occasionally glancing over as one might notice a gardener trimming hedges. Moses, summoned from his workshop to construct a pine coffin for the deceased, stood silent witness to the aftermath, his hands moving mechanically through the familiar task of measuring and cutting, while his eyes repeatedly returned to the bloodied form laid out on the workroom table. I had known Moses as a quiet man, thoughtful and careful in his speech and movements. Sarah's testimony continues, but his eyes changed that day. I saw it happen. Something broke inside him and something else took its place. He said nothing. But I knew then that Overseer Holt had sealed his own fate, though 2 years would pass before that debt came due. The journal entry for that date contains only a single line. Today I have seen the fullness of their barbarity, and I am at last resolved, followed by a blank page, the only such omission in the otherwise meticulous record. On the morning of the 4th of March, 1829, the body of Jeremiah Holt was discovered by a local fisherman at the edge of the cypress swamps near Goose Creek, approximately 3 miles from the Middleton plantation. his corpse positioned in a manner that the Charleston Mercury described as suggesting deliberate arrangement rather than accidental death. The coroner's report, preserved in the Berkeley County Archives and examined by researchers in 2020, notes that Holt's body bore unusual markings carved into the flesh of the chest and back, resembling symbols of unknown origin, which authorities interpreted as ritualistic in nature, possibly indicating the involvement of African superstitions or conjure practices. An investigation led by local magistrate William Thornton concluded that Holt had likely been murdered by a runaway slave named Isaiah, who had escaped from the neighboring Pinckney plantation 2 weeks prior, with Thornton's report citing the savage nature of the attack and the primitive symbolic markings as evidence that no white man could have conceived or executed such a deed. The manhunt that followed yielded no trace of Isaiah, whose disappearance was eventually attributed to death by misadventure in the swamplands or escape to northern territories. Moses remained entirely above suspicion, with multiple witnesses attesting to his presence in the workshop throughout the day in question, completing a mahogany dining table for the governor's mansion. The journal entries from February 1829, however, reveal meticulous planning spanning weeks, including detailed observations of Holt's habitual route when he visited a tavern in Goose Creek every Wednesday evening, calculations of travel times, and a map of the ambush location. The entry dated March 3 states, with chilling simplicity, "Tomorrow the debt comes due. I have shaped the cypress wood into the tools of justice, and the symbols are ready to be carved. Let those who find him wonder at their meaning, for each mark represents a life he has taken or destroyed. Isaiah, who escaped last month and knows the swamps better than any man, will meet me at the arranged place. What we do not for vengeance alone, but as a message." In the months following Holt's death, Moses's journal entries reveal the systematic development of what would become an extensive communication network, spanning at least 7 plantations across Berkeley County. With entries from April through December 1829 detailing his methodical recruitment of trusted individuals on neighboring properties and the establishment of coded messages transmitted through multiple means. Archaeological excavations conducted in 2020 by the University of South Carolina's Department of Anthropology uncovered physical evidence confirming the system described in the journal. A series of inconspicuous symbols carved into trees along plantation boundaries, positioned at regular intervals of approximately half a mile, with carbon-14 dating of the wood growth patterns confirming their creation between 1829 and 1831. Dr. Marcus Jenkins, who led the excavation team, noted in his published findings that the sophistication of this communication system demonstrates a level of organization among enslaved communities that antebellum authorities either failed to recognize or deliberately minimized in official records. The journal describes how Moses leveraged his privileged position as a craftsman, whose duties included delivering finished furniture pieces to neighboring plantations and into Charleston itself, allowing him to make contact with enslaved individuals on other properties while appearing to simply perform his assigned tasks. A detailed entry from September 1829 explains the symbol system. 3 vertical marks signify a safe house for runaways. A circle with a diagonal line warns of increased patrols, while a series of horizontal marks indicates the number of days until a planned meeting. While white authorities remained oblivious to the growing network, plantation records from this period show an increasing concern about unexplained coordination among enslaved populations. With a letter from Frederick Middleton to a neighboring plantation owner in November 1829, expressing alarm that runaway incidents appear to follow mysterious patterns, suggesting some form of communication we have yet to detect. Most significantly, the journal describes how the network gradually evolved from a means of sharing information into an organized resistance movement capable of coordinated action, with Moses writing in December 1829. What began as whispers between individuals has become a chorus of voices. We now number over 100 souls united in purpose, and the day approaches when whispers will give way to thunder. The pivotal alliance that would transform Moses's resistance from isolated acts to a coordinated movement occurred in February 1830, when Elizabeth Middleton accidentally discovered Moses's journal while delivering a book on carpentry techniques to his workshop during his absence. According to her letters to Lucretia Mott, discovered in the archives of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society and made public in 1967, Elizabeth experienced profound moral turmoil upon reading Moses's accounts. I have discovered that the man whose education I undertook as Christian charity has been engaged in activities that both terrify and compel me. I find myself standing at a precipice between the values of my upbringing and the undeniable justice of his cause. A subsequent letter dated the 12th of March, 1830, reveals her decision. I have chosen to become what my father would surely consider a traitor to my race and station, yet what I believe God will recognize as obedient to his higher law of human dignity. The journal entries from this period describe Elizabeth's initial confrontation with Moses, with his March 3 entry noting, "Miss Elizabeth came to me today with my journal in hand, and I prepared myself for the end of all our efforts. Instead, she asked how she might help." What followed was a remarkable partnership detailed through both Moses's journal and Elizabeth's correspondence, with Elizabeth providing crucial intelligence regarding overseer movements, patrol schedules, and updates on conversations among neighboring plantation owners about suspected slave activities. A coded section of Moses's journal, deciphered by linguists in 2021, reveals that Elizabeth created detailed maps of plantation security measures and established a system for alerting Moses to unexpected visitors or suspicious inquiries. Perhaps most significantly, Elizabeth used her position to travel to Charleston on shopping expeditions, carrying messages to sympathetic northern merchants who forwarded them to abolitionist contacts. Her final letter to Mott, dated November 1830, displays a complete transformation. "I no longer view these acts as rebellion, but as the natural right of any human being to claim freedom. What we do now will likely condemn me in history's eyes, if history is written by those who currently hold power, but I have made peace with that judgment." By the summer of 1830, Moses's reputation had spread through the invisible networks of enslaved communities across Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester counties, transformed from skilled craftsman to near mythic figure of resistance, while simultaneously, plantation owners throughout the region began reporting unprecedented security concerns to local authorities. The Charleston Courier's July 1830 edition published a series of increasingly alarmed notices regarding what the paper termed unexplained disappearances of overseers from at least 5 plantations, with the August 12th edition featuring a front-page editorial calling for increased militia patrols after the body of overseer Thomas Blackwood was discovered in circumstances eerily similar to Holt's death, bearing markings of a savage and symbolic nature. Moses's journal entries during this period reveal a profound psychological and tactical transformation, with the earlier raw emotional responses giving way to cold strategic calculation. The June 1830 entry methodically lists the names of 12 overseers across 3 counties, their daily routines, vulnerabilities in their security practices, and notations regarding which ones had been responsible for the most severe abuses. "We no longer act from impulse or isolated grievance," reads an entry from July 1830, "but move according to strategic necessity. Each action must serve the greater purpose and bring us closer to the day of reckoning." A secret meeting described in the journal, held deep in the Goose Creek swamps during a new moon in August 1830, brought together representatives from 9 plantations to coordinate their efforts, with Moses recording, "We have become an army without uniforms, moving invisibly through their world while they remain blind to ours." Local authorities, lacking any concept of such organized resistance, attributed the increasing incidents to random Negro violence and contagious savagery, with the Berkeley County Sheriff's report from September 830, concluding that these separate incidents, while troubling, appear to be unconnected acts perpetrated by different runaway slaves driven to desperation, a fundamental misunderstanding that allowed Moses's network to operate undetected beneath the growing atmosphere of paranoia and fear that now permeated the plantation communities of the South Carolina Low Country. The shattering of Moses's alliance with Elizabeth Middleton occurred on the 12th of October, 1830, when Frederick Middleton discovered a partially burned letter in the library fireplace, revealing his daughter's communication with Northern abolitionists and references to our mutual friend M. According to plantation records, Frederick summoned the county sheriff the following morning, but rather than exposing Moses, whose carpentry skills represented a significant financial investment, he directed his wrath entirely toward his daughter. The commitment papers, discovered in 1974 during the digitization of South Carolina mental health archives, show that Elizabeth was forcibly transported to the Charleston Asylum for Disturbed Women on October 14, with her father providing sworn testimony that she suffered from dangerous moral derangement and Negro sympathy disease, a diagnosis the attending physician described as a recognized form of female hysteria, in which white women of previously sound mind develop unnatural empathy toward and attraction to inferior races, resulting in delusional beliefs regarding their equality. The asylum's quarterly treatment records document Elizabeth's subjection to ice water immersion therapy, isolation in darkened quarters, and medicinal purging to cleanse the brain of inflammatory ideas. Moses's journal entry from October 17 contains only a single line, "They have taken her," followed by 3 days of silence, after which the handwriting changes noticeably, becoming more angular and precise as he writes. What happened to Miss Elizabeth has removed the final barrier between thought and action. I now see with perfect clarity that there can be no appeal to conscience where none exists, no transformation of hearts calcified by generations of cruelty disguised as natural order. The subsequent entries outline what Moses termed the Great Deliverance, a plan involving coordinated actions across Craven. 12 plantations, culminating in a December entry. The signal fires will be lit on the second full moon of the coming year. On that night, they will at last know fear equal to what they have inflicted. The journal entries from January and February of 1831 reveal the extraordinary scope and sophistication of what historians now recognize as potentially the largest coordinated slave revolt planned in American history prior to Nat Turner's rebellion. With meticulous precision, Moses documented the creation of a network spanning 12 plantations across 3 counties, with designated leaders at each location responsible for coordinating their specific groups, a hierarchical structure remarkably similar to modern military cell systems designed to ensure that the capture of any individual would not compromise the entire operation. The leather map discovered folded within the journal's binding, restored by conservation experts at the Smithsonian in 2021, displays an intricate knowledge of the regional geography, with carefully marked escape routes, utilizing the swamplands known only to local fishermen and hunters, predetermined gathering points in remote locations, and specific targets marked for simultaneous strikes, including overseer quarters, militia armories, and the Charleston Road bridges essential for bringing reinforcements to the plantations. Most remarkable was the sophisticated timetable accounting for variables including moon phases, patrol schedules, and even seasonal water levels in the swamps that would affect passage. Unlike Vesey's conspiracy, which was betrayed before it began, writes Dr. Eleanor Wright in her 2022 analysis, Moses's plan incorporated specific countermeasures against informants, including a system whereby the exact date would only be communicated 3 days before the event, and participants would only know their immediate responsibilities rather than the full scope of the operation. A particularly striking journal entry dated the 12th of February, 1831, demonstrates Moses's strategic thinking. The weakness of previous attempts has always been their reliance on mass action without sufficient coordination. Our strength lies not in numbers alone, but in striking simultaneously at multiple points, creating confusion that will prevent an organized response while our main groups move through the corridors we have identified. By the time they understand what is happening, 300 of our people will have reached the sanctuary points. Most chilling to authorities who later examined the documents was the systematic list of collaborators among the enslaved population on each plantation, revealing that Moses had recruited over 200 participants, including house servants positioned to provide intelligence on master movements and access to weapons normally kept secure. The carefully constructed conspiracy collapsed on the 17th of March 1831, when Elijah, an enslaved stable hand from the neighboring Pinckney plantation who had been recruited into Moses's network, revealed the entire plot to his master in exchange for promised manumission and safe passage to a northern state. The Charleston Mercury's March 19 edition carried the shocking front-page headline, "Massive Slave Insurrection Narrowly Averted," with subsequent pages detailing the discovery of weapons caches and the arrest of 27 enslaved individuals across multiple plantations. Amidst the unfolding chaos, Moses vanished from the Middleton workshop, taking with him only his journal and tools, initiating what would become the most extensive manhunt in South Carolina history. Frederick Middleton, enraged by what he termed the ultimate betrayal of generosity and Christian stewardship, posted an unprecedented reward of $5,000 for Moses's capture, a sum equivalent to the price of 10 prime field hands, with newspaper advertisements appearing as far north as Richmond and as far west as New Orleans, describing him as a monster in human form and the most dangerous Negro in South Carolina. History. The Berkeley County Sheriff organized search parties comprising over 200 armed men with tracking dogs, focusing initially on the swamplands near Goose Creek before expanding into neighboring counties, while the governor authorized the deployment of state militia units to patrol the roads and inspect all wagons traveling northward. Testimony from captured conspirators, extracted under torture and preserved in court records, revealed fragments of Moses's contingency plans, including a network of at least 14 safe houses operated by both free black allies and enslaved individuals on remote plantations, a system of disguises and forged travel papers, and detailed knowledge of unpatrolled waterways leading eventually to northern territories. For 3 years, reported sightings flooded sheriff's offices throughout the region, with rewards paid for the capture of at least 7 men mistakenly identified as Moses, while periodic acts of sabotage and overseer disappearances suggested his continued presence in the area. The Charleston Courier of November 1832 reported that the escaped Negro called Moses has assumed an almost supernatural reputation among the slave population, with whispered stories of his ability to move invisibly between plantations and even enter Charleston itself undetected, becoming a figure of terror to authorities and hope to those still in bondage. After 3 years of successful evasion, Moses's capture occurred on the 9th of April 1834 in the dense forests near the Santee River when Thomas, a fellow runaway with whom he had shared shelter for several weeks, succumbed to the temptation of the still-standing $5,000 reward, slipping away during the night to alert authorities in Georgetown to Moses's location. The Charleston Daily Courier's triumphant April 12 headline, "The Monster of Goose Creek Apprehended at Last," described how a contingent of 20 armed men surrounded the small cabin at dawn, finding Moses alone and unarmed, offering no resistance as he was placed in heavy iron restraints and transported under armed guard to Charleston for trial. The court proceedings, reconstructed from transcripts discovered in the South Carolina State Archives in 1982, reveal a trial that lasted only 2 days despite the magnitude of the charges, with Moses maintaining complete silence throughout, refusing to confirm his identity or respond to any questions posed by the court-appointed defense attorney, who made only perfunctory objections to the proceedings. Prosecutor William Pinckney presented evidence linking Moses to 7 overseer killings across 3 counties, including personal items belonging to the victims found among Moses's possessions, witness testimony placing him near the scenes of several attacks, and a detailed analysis of the symbolic markings found on the bodies, which a Charleston University professor identified as derived from West African religious traditions. Most damning was the testimony of 17 former conspirators already sentenced to execution or transportation, who confirmed Moses's role as the architect of the planned rebellion. What remains striking about the trial record, as noted by legal historian Dr. James Thornwell in his 2022 analysis, is the prosecution's fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of Moses's resistance. The state viewed each killing as an isolated act of savagery or personal vengeance, failing entirely to recognize the systematic campaign of strategic disruption evident in Moses's journal. The jury deliberation lasted less than 30 minutes before returning a guilty verdict on all counts, with Judge Harrison Beaufort pronouncing the death sentence for crimes so monstrous they strain the very boundaries of human comprehension, setting the execution date for the 15th of May, 1834, and ordering it to be conducted as a public spectacle to demonstrate the swift and terrible consequences awaiting those who would follow this creature's example. The execution of Moses was scheduled for noon on the 15th of May, 1834, in the central square of Charleston, with public notices appearing throughout the city inviting citizens to witness justice administered to the notorious monster of Goose Creek. According to newspaper accounts from the Charleston Mercury, construction of an unusually high gallows began 3 days in advance, designed to elevate the condemned man above the crowd for maximum visibility, with temporary wooden stands erected around the square to accommodate the anticipated spectators, who began gathering before dawn on the appointed day. By mid-morning, an estimated 3,000 onlookers had assembled, including plantation owners who had traveled from neighboring counties with their families, treating the occasion as a social event of considerable importance. The prisoner arrived in a reinforced wagon under armed escort, his hands and feet in iron shackles, wearing the simple linen garments provided to the condemned. Witness accounts describe Moses as walking to the gallows with unnatural composure and a dignity inappropriate to his station and circumstances, refusing assistance from the guards as he climbed the 13 steps to the platform. The journal, remarkably preserved until the end, contains a final entry dated May 14, written in the Charleston jail cell the night before his execution. "Tomorrow, they will kill the body they purchased, thinking they thereby eliminate the threat, but they fundamentally misunderstand what they face. They called me monster because I refused to be their beast of burden. History will judge who the real monsters were." The journal then records his methodical preparations, including detailed instructions for Sarah regarding the journal's concealment beneath the slave quarter floorboards. According to the execution record, Moses maintained his silence throughout the proceedings, declining the opportunity to speak final words when prompted by the attending minister, and refusing the blindfold offered by the executioner. The Mercury reported that as the trapdoor opened at precisely 12 o'clock, a peculiar hush fell over the normally boisterous crowd. The discovery of Moses's journal in 2019 catalyzed a profound reassessment of historical narratives surrounding slave resistance throughout the antebellum South, with the Archaeological Journal of American History's 2021 special issue dedicated entirely to what editors termed the Moses effect, the recognition that previously documented isolated incidents of rebellion likely represented coordinated resistance obscured by deliberate historical mischaracterization. Dr. Eleanor Wright's comprehensive analysis, published in the Southern Historical Review, demonstrates how contemporary white authorities systematically downplayed the organizational sophistication of slave resistance, preferring narratives of savage outbursts and primitive violence that reinforced racist ideologies while concealing their own vulnerability to strategic opposition. The journal's detailed accounts of Moses's network has prompted researchers to re-examine historical records from Virginia to Georgia, identifying patterns suggesting similar resistance structures that went unrecognized or deliberately obscured in official documentation. Perhaps most significantly, on the 185th anniversary of Moses's execution in May 2019, over 300 individuals identifying as descendants of the Middleton Plantation's enslaved community gathered at the excavation site where the journal was discovered. conducting a ceremony that organizer Josephine Williams, a direct descendant of Sarah, described as reclaiming the narrative of a man who history labeled a monster but who represented the human drive for freedom in the face of systematic brutality. The ceremony included readings from the journal and the brooding placement of a permanent memorial stone bearing the words from Moses's final entry, the Middleton Plantation Historical Site. Previously known primarily for its authentic antebellum architecture and insights into gracious plantation life, has transformed its exhibition focus to center the experiences of the enslaved community, with Moses's story and journal serving as the cornerstone of this recontextualization. In her keynote address at the 2022 American Historical Association Conference, Dr. Gabrielle Foreman observed that Moses's journal provides an unprecedented first-person perspective on resistance that forces us to confront not just the horrors of slavery, but the fundamental mischaracterization of those who refuse to accept their enslavement as passive victims rather than strategic actors with moral agency and political vision. What was once dismissed as monstrous is now recognized as the quintessentially human refusal to accept dehumanization, challenging us to interrogate whose humanity our historical narratives have privileged and whose they have denied.